there's school food and then there's food that children bring to school that their parents give them. My first child in preschool, she was about 4.5 or something. And I noticed that there were a lot of birthday parties, and every time they had a birthday party, they had cupcakes. School was from like 9 to 12, so she'd come home, she wouldn't eat lunch. So essentially, she had cupcakes for lunch, which I don't think anybody would say this is a healthy lunch. So I wrote a letter, and from then on, believe me, the rest of the year, there were no more cupcakes. You know, a lot of people's self-esteem and livelihood is involved in here, and they don't want to know they've been doing things wrong. So we got to have, you know, we may be convinced about what's right, but we got to have some compassion for people who have been doing it a certain way all these years and are just beginning to learn that there are better ways perhaps to do it. The theoretical framework is standard science, which looks at the chemistry, it looks at the thermodynamics, at the calories, and so forth and so on. And this is what they're working with. Not even nutritionists are understanding this yet. It's getting better because there's now a whole movement among academics to study food synergy. Food synergy means the relationship between the nutrients. So in other words, whole foods. Now, nutritionists are beginning to speak about whole foods now. They don't have a good definition, at least none that I have seen, but at least it's beginning. You know, to me, whole food is a food that has all the elements, all the edible parts that nature intended. My PhD was a theoretical piece of work. So what I looked at is that we need a theoretical framework to make choices about food. And going by chemistry only is not enough, because people get confused because there's always new studies, and this study shows this works, and then that study shows that works, and then they can't make up their mind. Well, does a fake food, does it cause cancer, doesn't cause cancer? I don't know. It may cause cancer in some people, maybe in some mice. But that's not what I go by. I go by what's real and what's alive. So food has to be real, it has to be fresh, it has to be natural, as much as possible whole food. You know, so those are the principles that I base my school on. Those are the principles in my books. You know, that's when I read the labels. Is this real? Is it refined? Is it chemicalized? Obesity is like the key word these days, but even hardening of the arteries. You know, I remember reading about, you know, when the children in this country have hardening of the arteries by the age of 10. And it's not the meat, and it's not the fat. It's the sugar and the dairy that does that. So what do we do? Fortunately, human beings are very resilient. So even if you didn't do it very perfectly when you were little, or it wasn't done to you perfectly when you were little, you know, as you get older, you can make changes, and you will get better. Lots of people today were raised on really crummy foods, and they get this feeling that they have to change their food. I see these people in my school all the time. They get this feeling they have to do something about their diet. They change their diet, things improve fantastically. I tell you, the worst food for children, the worst, bar none, is sugar, white sugar. Especially on a low-fat, low-protein diet. So if you have children who eat little meat, no fat, or little fat, and they eat a lot of sugar, this is going to get their brains acting really funny. Artificial sweeteners are just as bad, if not worse. There's a really interesting book called Feeding the Brain by somebody called C. Keith Connors. And he's got a lot of studies about the damage done by sugars and artificial sweeteners. So the thing that I would say, the most important thing for kids' brains to really work well is you give them whole grains for the B vitamins, plenty of vegetables, good quality protein, fish, chicken, eggs, natural sweeteners like bananas, raisins, and no white sugar, you know? Now people freak out about that. My God, no sugar. I remember one psychiatrist once told me, but candy is love. Which, you know, to me it's a very strange understanding of love. If you give your kid a food that's not good for them, to me this is not necessarily love. I mean, you may think it's love, but once you know that it's not good for them, I think you should change your mind. Kids who can't get out of bed in the morning, you take a look at the sugar that they ate, how much sugar they ate the day before. When you go through withdrawal, you just sit through it. You just go through withdrawal. Make sure they have sweet flavored things. Like I said, dates, pitted dates are a great sweet because they're a whole food, they're very sweet, and most of the time I think you can't eat a whole lot of them. Sweet potatoes or yams, have sweet potatoes in your meals. For a sweetener, I like maple syrup, I like agave nectar. So if somebody wants to do home cooking or something with sweeteners, those are the two I would recommend. You can get jams made with pure fruit, and those I would recommend. So there are many possibilities. The thing is, from my experience over the last 35 years I've been working with this, cane sugar is about the worst. And the problem today, as it's like I go through these, and I now have to read labels of foods I used to buy because they've been bought up by big companies, and they all put evaporated cane juice in them, and it's as if that were not sugar, but this is sugar. So they've put sugar in chicken stock. It's everywhere. The less foods with labels you get, the better. So cook from scratch. If you can't cook from scratch, you're too busy, cook twice a week. That's one way to do it. You cook on Sunday, you cook on Wednesday, and you make enough for the week. It'll last in the fridge. You don't have to freeze it. But you have to be convinced.